And welcome on in to the latest edition of the Blue Horseshoe Podcast. He is George Bremer. I am Ryan Hickey, recording this on the last Tuesday in June. And before we get into this big pod, George, a lot about the playmakers, the running backs, the tight ends, the receivers on the Colts and kind of their projections for 2023. A little housekeeping, little updates on the pod here as we do enter the last few weeks before training camp does start. So right now, scheduled, right? Because things do change. If you get maybe a Jonathan Taylor extension or less likely but possible Michael Pittman Jr. extension or any sort of team news about the Colts, obviously we will be here to jump in for an emergency pod. But assuming all is quiet on the home front, George, we are planning for this to be the last pod of the summer. Essentially take a little quick 2-week break. You're going on vacation next week. I'll be on vacation the following week after that. So both kind of get a little R&R, a little beach time, a little sun time, come back. And when we do come back in about 2.5 weeks or so, or I guess really 3 weeks from now, basically, George, right on the eve of training camp, and we'll have a big time training camp preview pod. So really, this is going to kind of the last really off-season pod we'll have before we really are knee deep in a training camp and in football mode here. So this is kind of really one of the last big ones here. So make sure as we really start to rev it up here after this little 2-week hiatus, you are subscribing on YouTube, the Blue Horseshoe Pod, and downloading wherever you get your pods, the Blue Horseshoe Podcast in the bright blue logo. We were just talking about this before, George, but it's kind of crazy. For whatever reason, the summertime, I feel like now that we're out of school and kind of, the summer vacation and the joy that you would feel when school ended and the dread you would feel when August comes around and school starting to begin again, feels like the summertime then went fast. Now, out of school, it's gone even faster. I can't believe that we're basically 2 weeks away, for the most part, from really training camp almost being here and then football season basically right in our laps.
It's insane. I mean, it feels like OTAs and minicamp just wrapped, and here we are, talking about training camp, which for me is the start of the season. I mean, that's what we were talking about before. Like, once training camp gets rolling, it's Colts season. 2023 season is underway, and from there on, until January, it's all Colts all the time. So I do think it's an interesting year. I mean, we've talked about it several times, but having a new head coach, having potentially a rookie quarterback starting, right from the go, it's very unique. I think it's added a lot of new energy here. But yeah, it just feels like not just the summer, the whole offseason just kind of flown by because it's been so eventful,
Yes.
Search, and then all the draft intrigue, and then it was, all the new the first time Richardson put on a Colts helmet, the first time he practiced in public, the first pass, all these things. So that's all going to start over again now. First training camp practice, the first preseason game, first hit he takes, all these things that are coming around. And I think it does add a new, just a little bit of variety into things, freshens things up a little bit. I think everybody, you even kind of feel it from the fan base that there's a new energy right now as you don't know what to expect.
Right, and that's nice. I mean, you hope obviously this works out with Steichen and Richardson, but it is nice to deviate from the path they've been on the last few years, which I do think kind of does help kind of reinvigorate the fans. I know definitely for myself, looking forward to the season, even though we both have been consistent about probably the season not going very well, but it's still nice to have something to look forward to. Whereas the last few years, especially, it's been some brutal finishes and some ugly football. So even if it's ugly this year, which it will be, at least there's still reason for hope going forward. And it's not just another lost season as we're sitting here in December and January talking about a failure of either the Carson Wentz era or the Matt Ryan era. So at least there's a reason for hope going forward here. Hopefully, George, as you're sitting here at the end of the 2023 season, unlike the end of the 2022 and unlike the end of the 2021 seasons, that is for sure. One reason for hope, and a big theme of this podcast today, George, is going to be not about Anthony Richardson per se, but the weapons around him. Because it's obviously fair to say with how big of a project Richardson is this year, one of the ways it's going to help determine his development, not only this year, but going forward, is how well everyone else on the offense plays around him. And it was really interesting because ESPN this week released their list of basically the team ranking each team's playmakers 1 through 32. And it was a collective, unit, running backs, receivers, tight ends, all tied into one. And the Colts, and this is a projection, right? This is now going into 2023, kind of using last year's numbers. This is ESPN and specifically Bill Barnwell. I think does a really good job covering the league and kind of using data to make accurate points. This is his projection for how the Colts playmakers, receivers, running backs, and tight ends, how he thinks they will do in 2023. Out of all 32 teams, he says the Colts will have the 25th most productive skill playmaking positions, again, combined running backs, tight ends, receivers. Your initial reaction to where, if in fact Bill is right, and we're sitting here at the end of 2023 talking about these skill positions being one of the worst in the league, your reaction, George?
Yeah, I think it's reflective that, this is a situation where you've got a lot more potential than you do proven production. I mean, outside of Jonathan Taylor, who's coming off the worst year of his career, and Michael Pittman Jr., I don't know if there's anybody else who's put up a solid NFL season. Mo Alley Cox has some years under his belt. He's got that game against Minnesota, perennially, looked at as kind of a breakout candidate, but there's not. You look at the back of his football card, it doesn't wow you. Nothing jumps off the page at you. And with everyone else, I mean, Alec Pierce is just coming into his second year. Jelani Woods is just coming into his second year. You've got rookies in the mix, like Josh Downs. You bring in a guy like Isaiah McKenzie, who's trying to take a bigger role than what he had in Buffalo. Outside of Pittman and Taylor, I don't know that there's a single skill position guy that you look at who you can point to a season or even a stretch of games that they've had where they've been an above average NFL player. It doesn't mean that they won't end up being there, but I don't know what basis you have for a ranking much higher than this right now. When you look at, it's just like many other things with this team, a lot of unknowns, a lot of potential, but not much, resume to go on.
Absolutely. Look, you said it before. There's a lot of potential, but not a lot of proven talent on the field so far. And if this plays out to where we're talking about this being one of the, basically not playing out to their potential and still being one of the worst overall playmaking units in the league, obviously it's a massive disappointment. That is something where this team is going to be even worse than we think, and we think it's already going to be a bad year. That's going to really hurt Anthony Richardson's development, and that maybe could stunt his growth altogether. They have to be, I would say, bare minimum league average. And Bill Barnwell, in this 25th projection, also tallied for the fact that he believes Jonathan Taylor will have a bounce back year and be closer to 2021 than he was in 2022. So if that's the case, and you get a big year out of your running back and still massive failures from tight end and running back, George, that is, again, major disappointment whatsoever. I would say the goal for this year, realistically, and what they need to come out of, I would say about league average. So 15th, 16th. If we are sitting here and they are right around, let's say 15 to 17 range in terms of their playmakers and how they perform in 2023, I would consider that in year number one a win. They do have to perform better. I think the potential is legitimately there. Now it's obviously about putting it on the field, but I think this is the year you have to perform. Richardson's development, again, is going to be in large part based on how everyone around him plays. If you have guys stinking it up, if Pittman can't take another step forward, if Pierce can't build off of an okay rookie year, if Jelani Woods, like I said, can't put more consistent production out there, you're not getting a lot out of your tight ends, and really it's Jonathan Taylor, no one else, Richardson's screwed. He is absolutely screwed, and it really kind of changes the way you evaluate your quarterback going forward here, because if it's that bad around him, I don't see a big-time path for his success at the NFL, which is why it's imperative for these guys around him to play well. That's my goal, George, for 2023. League average. We're not saying top 10, but if you're 15 to 17, 15 to 18, right around league average for Richardson's rookie year, I would say that's a win.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking 25th is what, bottom quarter of teams there?
The bottom quartile.
Yeah, I mean, it's you're in relegation territory, right? Like you're in trouble there when you're down that low. And I think the scary part of it is that's with, like you said, the bounce back from Jonathan Taylor expected. It tells you that around the league, there's not a lot of respect or a lot of, optimism around this Colts skill position group. I think there's a couple guys that really need big years. And you mentioned both of them.
Perfect.
I think Alec Pierce is right at the top of the list. You want to see that year two jump, but also, the one thing that we feel confident about with Anthony Richardson so far after, a month or so of watching him. So we're really got some really locked in opinions here. But the one thing
Huge
that's
sample size to use here.
right, huge amount of data to go on. But even going back to his college tape, the deep ball is probably his strength. And so I think that's where Pierce comes in so important right now. His speed, his ability to take the top off of defense. He's the one guy really in that receiving core that you feel like can get downfield and make that explosive, 50, 60, 70-yard play. Didn't see a lot of it last year because quarterbacks, quite frankly, weren't capable of making those plays. And so I think to me, that's one area I'm really going to keep an eye on. If Richardson and Pierce can kind of get that deep ball chemistry down and Pierce can become a big play guy, I think you said it earlier this offseason. If he's a guy that has like 2 catches for 90 yards, that's fine. That's what you want. That's the number that you want to see from him, week in and week out. He's just got to keep defenses honest. And I think it's so important if they're going to be as run heavy as we think they are. It's so important that Pierce is there and is a legitimate threat so the defenses can't just come out in 9, 10 in the box every single week and, try to stuff that running game and just get this offense behind the chains. The other guy is another second-year guy is Jelani Woods. I mean, he started to see late in the year. He really started to figure some things out. He feels like a guy, he's obviously a mismatch. I mean, his size, his speed, his athleticism, there aren't many guys out there who are going to be able to guard him. And it feels like a security blanket type of a thing for a young quarterback, especially down in the red zone. If he can be that guy who can get open in the end zone or even make contested catches in the end zone, which saw him do a little bit of last year, that could be huge for a quarterback who's trying to find his way. So I think if those two guys take steps forward and are average to above average starters at their position, I think that right there will raise the ranking. But they're question marks. You don't have enough from either one of them to feel confident that they're going to make that jump, but the potential is certainly there.
I'm glad you mentioned Jelani Woods. I think that's the guy I kind of look at and circle in this offense going to this year that I think really has to make a jump in year number 2, because like you mentioned, especially the tight end position now we've seen in the NFL, it truly is like if you have a good legitimate tight end, it's truly the only position I could argue that's a mismatch no matter what. You're big, you're fast. Like you see, for example, in these rankings by Bill and Barnwell, here the Chiefs, their playmakers ranked at 19. He's basically saying it's Travis Kelce and nobody else whatsoever. So you look back, they just won the Super Bowl. Yes, they have Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, obviously. But Travis Kelce's unguardable. He arguably, maybe, George, is the most unguardable player in the league right now because he's so big, he's so fast, he's so agile. There's now one defender that could match him up and slow him down, let alone lock him down. And so you see a guy of Jelani Woods' size, athletic ability. Again, with his big frame, that could kind of almost make throws easier for Richardson because if you're a little inaccurate, you're still throwing to a huge body mass where you can just pull it in and the catch radius is still really massive. So you can kind of, allow for maybe a little errant of a pass and still have it be successful. Jelani Woods, I think, has to be the guy to step up here in year number 2 because the tight end is still really only position that's still a mismatch no matter what you do on defense. And you talk about big frame, big target, tight end still, I think, the quarterback's best friend. That has to be the position. And Jelani Woods, I think, has to be the player this year for the Colts. Or if they do want to kind of move up and go from, let's say, 25th to 15th, that's, I think, where you can kind of make the most headway in moving up those rankings and just being league average for 2023. But it's like I said, there's a lot of potential, I think, but also a lot of unproven talent. You're going to really need, I think Pierce is absolutely a great one, like you mentioned, kind of keep the defenses honest and really stretch them out and lean into what Richardson does well. And also tight ends, especially, I'm glad you mentioned the red zone, where things get tight, where the accuracy issues could really flare up as a negative for the Colts, where sometimes if you're slow decision-making, that split second is a difference between a touchdown and an interception. Possibly that's where you really would think Jelani Woods would kind of really make his hay for this offense and really be a big-time performer in the areas that the field really does condense.
And if Woods is a threat down there to the level that he could be, and you get Pittman to be a red zone threat, which to me is one of the most baffling things in his career so far. His touchdown numbers have been so low. And you would expect that he would be a guy with his size and his physicality who would be a big factor in the red zone. It just hasn't been the case so far. You can get him into that mix, Woods into that mix, and then you've got the threat of Richardson running and obviously Jonathan Taylor. You can put a lot of stress on defenses down in the red zone if you can get those things all working together at the same time. But I think Woods is so important because, too, when you go back to the Philadelphia offense where obviously Shane Steichen's coming from, you look at how big Dallas Goedert was in their success and in the role that he played. And I don't know anybody else on the roster really who fits that role right now, Freddie. That's not Mo Alley Cox's game. Drew Ogletree had a great summer before he tore up his knee last year in training camp, but we haven't seen anything from him. We don't know. He's another guy with a lot of potential who you're excited to see what he's going to look like this year, but we don't have any kind of track record there. Kylan Granson's had his moments here and there last couple of years, has looked good this spring, but I won't put him in that Dallas Goedert kind of range. And the other 19 tight ends on the roster, as it feels, are all, veteran guys who've been elsewhere, who have had smaller roles, and then Pharaoh Brown, who's here to kind of be that hammer. So, to me, Woods is the only guy who you feel confident in saying, okay, he can do that role. He can play the role that Dallas Goedert played. And that makes him even more important. I mean, all the things that we mentioned before, but now also, hey, this is a pretty integral role in this offense, and you literally aren't sure who else does it.
I think it's both a blessing and a curse too, George, for this team. When you look at their roster construction, that there's really not a main guy, like outside of Jonathan Taylor. Like, I think it's a blessing in part because I think it does, when you kind of look at Shane Steichen and coming over from the Eagles, you look at that offense last year and even in Jalen Hurts' first year as a starter in 2021, they spread the ball around a ton, right? It's not like you see Travis Kelce in Kansas City, high volume guy. He gets the ball a ton. They really spread the wealth. A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, the running backs out of the backfield. Like, in one sense, yes, there's a lot of mouths to feed, and Shane Steichen did a really good job of doing that. And so it keeps defenses off balance. And I think it does allow Richardson to get in the habit of reading the entire field, which I think is obviously good for him, and not just kind of lock in on one guy and just, I'm going, no matter what the defense is doing, I'm throwing to this guy. We've seen plenty of quarterbacks do that. We've seen Carson Wentz do it too many times and work to the negative more than the positive. So I think when you don't have that one alpha at receiver, or especially a tight end, those two guys, when it comes to the passing game, I think it will help Richardson see the field and develop good habits in terms of putting the ball where the defense dictates instead of just locking in on one guy and saying, all right, this is the guy I'm going to. I trust him the most. No matter what the defense is doing, I'm throwing him on this down. I don't think that's the best situation and the best way for Richardson to develop and reach a ceiling. But also it's a negative because you don't have that guy you can rely on. And now when we're talking about this team and having to, beat their projections and just be league average, they don't, it's not like they need just one guy to step up. It's not like, oh, okay, if Alec Pierce plays well, this offense is going to be, pretty good. They need Pierce to step up. They need Jelani Woods to step up, especially Pittman Jr. last year after a down year. They need him to step up. Josh Downs, at least one other tight end. Running backs out of the backfield. Like, we are talking about just for the Colts to jump, let's say 10 spots in this projection from 25th to 15th or 16th. They need like 3 or 4 guys to step up and have arguably career years. And so that's where it's like, I think in one sense, you can allow Richardson to get into good habits by spreading the ball out. But in the other sense, when we're talking about just being league average in terms of your playmaking units, they need multiple guys to have career years. That's a lot to put on, those players, and a lot of pressure put on them when you're talking about first-time head coach and a rookie quarterback still trying to get their footing and figure it out. It's going to be an uphill climb for this offense.
There's no question about it. And Steichen said again and again, one of the key things he wants is that explosive plays. That was Philadelphia's bread and butter. Those 20-plus yard runs, 30, 40, 50-plus pass plays. That's what Philadelphia, they were such a quick strike offense last year. You saw it right at the end of the Super Bowl when they went right down the field, got right back in the game, and then the Chiefs came back and put it away. But, that's what the Steichen offense, when it's at its best, that's what it's looked like. That quick strike, big play offense. And you really wonder, where is that going to come from? Sure, Jonathan Taylor's that home run hitter back there. And you would expect that he's going to have a better year, and you're going to see more of those breakaway, big time runs from him this year. Richardson will probably have a run or two like that. I mean, just looking at his physical ability and looking at what he did in college, you figure he's going to have a few big plays in the run game, but where do they come from in the passing game? And I think that's why the ranking is so low. And I think that's where the biggest concern is, because even when Pittman's at his best, he's not really a big play guy. He's a high volume guy. He's a chain mover. And I think you need those guys too. And they're incredibly important, obviously, to your offense. But you don't really think of him as being that explosive, quick strike kind of receiver. Downs really wasn't that guy in college. He was more of an underneath guy. Certainly can move well with the ball, in open space, but not that kind of quick strike guy. Tight ends by nature are not, unless you're Kelsey, you're not really a quick strike weapon. So again, that's why I go back to Alec Pierce. He's the one guy in this group who you feel like he could be that sort of 50, 60, 70-yard, take the top off the defense guy. I don't know where else that comes from. I don't think it's really Isaiah McKenzie's game. None of the other younger receivers, they haven't done anything yet in the league. You're still waiting to see where they're going to come from. I think it's really important that you get, when they drafted Pierce, that's what they were talking about. You're talking about elite speed, just an all-around athlete. He jumps well, he runs well, he's got good hands. They need that to all come out on the field this year. If this offense can't produce those explosive, electric plays, it's probably going to struggle. I mean, it feels like it's going to be one of those years where it's you either got a big play or two during the drive and you scored, or you didn't and it was a punt or a turnover. And at least early in the year, it's hard for me to see where else those plays come from if not Alec Pierce.
I wish I had an answer for you, George. I don't. I think hit the nail on the head perfectly, and it's really a one-man band in terms of bringing that explosion, especially pushing the ball down the field. I think that leads us perfectly into the next topic. And when you kind of look at this list of playmakers and how down the national media is on the Colts weapons at receiver, tight end, and running back, I think it also puts a huge charge on Chris Ballard's back. If you listen to this podcast, especially for me, I've been a Ballard defender. I did not think he deserved to get fired this offseason. I think it was the right move in giving him the opportunity to draft a quarterback for the first time, which he's done so. But I think this article, George, in part puts a huge heap of pressure on Chris Ballard, because if you look at, and we're just kind of highlighting a lot of negatives when it comes to the playmakers, now that you got the rookie quarterback, the most important job for Chris Ballard is putting now talent around him. And at least according to ESPN and Bill Barnwell, who, again, I think is a very smart man, who is not one for hyperbole, is not someone who is, he looks at a lot of facts and looks at a lot of the data. I think he's not wrong in saying right now that this team projects to not be one of the most explosive offenses in the league, to say the least. And if that is actually the case, you look at Chris Ballard this time next year, I think there's all the pressure in the world for him to finally, for the first time, deviate from the norm and be aggressive in terms of whether it's trading for a receiver, trading up in the draft to get maybe Marvin Harrison Jr. if you're not in a spot where you can get him right away, being aggressive in the tight end market, or doing something to bring playmakers to this team. You need, and a large part of Anthony Richardson's development, again, is talent around him. It's not an accident that Patrick Mahomes developed into Patrick Mahomes when you have arguably a Hall of Fame receiver in Tyreek Hill, a Hall of Fame tight end in Travis Kelce, and a Hall of Fame head coach in Andy Reid all around him as he's coming up, and he's making his meteoric rise in the NFL. You need talent around your quarterback. Look at Shane Steichen last year in Philly, all the talent they had with A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Miles Sanders, Dallas Goedert, and they had a legitimate, top-tier talent in almost every position. You need that. And so if you're Chris Ballard, again, we both said, I think accurately, 2023 is basically a trial period for everybody. See what works, keep what does, throw out what doesn't. And part of that is if you cannot get production out of Michael Pittman Jr., if you cannot get consistent production out of your tight ends, you have to finally be aggressive for the first time in actually shoring up and getting some legitimate bona fide talent. And if you can't do that, I think you got to be fired. Next offseason, I think, is the make or break offseason for Chris Ballard, because you have to legitimately, George, put talent on this roster.
Yeah, well, that's another one of the things that this ranking reflects. one of the biggest knocks on Ballard during his time here that I think has been well earned and well documented is his reluctance to put a lot of assets into the receiving position. It's been mid-tier free agents. They haven't taken a first round receiver. It's been second round or lower. A lot of times it's a day 3 pick, where he comes and gets these receivers. Pittman was a second rounder and Pierce was a second rounder. But it's been a lot more Michael Strawn type of additions that have come to this team, under Ballard. And that's how you end up in this spot. And I do think if you look at the recent history of young quarterbacks and the guys that have done well, the guys that have succeeded, they've all either had somebody there when they got there, like Justin Herbert with Keenan Allen, who's, a special receiver and able to make plays for him, or they've quickly added those guys. I mean, Burrow came in, I think they got Higgins his first year, and then you come and get Jamar Chase the next year. That you're building around your quarterback. You're giving him what he needs to succeed. You look at, Josh Allen in Buffalo, and they go and they trade for Stephon Diggs, and that's when that offense really took off. Trying to think of some of the other younger guys around the league right now. I just feel like it's time and time again. There either was a top flight guy there when they were drafted, or, within that, the same draft that they were taken in, or the next year at the latest, they added a young player with them, or they went and made a huge trade like Stephon Diggs. And the teams that don't do that, I feel like, are the teams that end up kind of regretting their quarterback pick, because you've got to support these guys. It can't be, Ballard says himself, it can't be about one guy. You can't put it all on Anthony Richardson's shoulders. And so the most important thing you can do is protect him. The offensive line, I think, is the single most important element here. They really didn't put a lot of resources into that this year either. That there's a lot of hope that guys are going to bounce back who have had great years there before. They didn't add a lot of new pieces to that line. And then the second most important thing is those skill position guys. And again, outside of Jonathan Taylor, who's doing a lot of heavy lifting in this position group right now. I don't know where else. Pittman's been a reliable guy, 99 catches last year, 1,000 yards a year before that. After that, where's the production coming from? It's a lot of hope and a lot of potential. And yeah, that's definitely got to be an offseason focus. I mean, if you're going to have this offense take that next step, if you're going to give Shane Steichen a real chance to install his system and, make it work, and you're going to give Anthony Richardson a real chance to run that scheme and succeed in the NFL, you got to get better at the skill positions.
I think especially with a lot of fans, right? We always, because quarterback is so hyper-focused and everyone wants to put the game on the quarterback's shoulders. Either they win, it's all that guy. If they lose, it's all his fault. You literally look at every team with a talented quarterback that's actually good in the NFL. There's no team that is just a quarterback and nobody else. They need help. I know it's not sexy to talk about, and it's so much easier after a playoff loss to blame the quarterback than is to blame the GM for not making a move back in March to get, whatever they need, some sort of running back or receiver. Like, I understand it's way easier just to point the finger at the player and say, oh, he played bad, it's his fault. But a lot of the times, George, like I said, quarterback, you just cannot have success by yourself. It's impossible to do so. And every team you look at that's actually talented, that's either a playoff contender or Super Bowl contender, they have bare minimum one guy that is top of his position, maybe on a Hall of Fame track, to help the quarterback out at mostly either tight end or receiver. It's not a secret. You need help around the quarterback, especially for a guy of Richardson's status coming to the league where there's so much inexperience, so many question marks, so much raw talent that you're trying to mold into hopefully being one day maybe the best quarterback in the NFL. Yes, a lot of that is fundamentals, a lot of that is coaching, but also a lot of that is what is around him. Who can make Richardson's job easier? And so now all of a sudden you don't have to have him be a hero every single play. And like you said, this ranking right now and Bill Barnwell's projection of the Colts, even with Jonathan Taylor having a bounce back year, still being 25th in terms of playmaking, it's all on Chris Ballard. And if you're Jim Irsay, again, this season's not going to go very well. You need to hear Chris Ballard's plan as soon as the season ends to how he's going to get more talent. If it's basically status quo, we're going to be patient. We're going to hope, like you said, that these guys that we drafted turn out. We're going to hope some of the guys that we signed, have career years. Then you got to be fired at that point. And that's where my defending Chris Ballard stops. And the firing and the blame starts, because now the clock is ticking. Now we know the NFL is not a patient league. Owners, fans, media, we want to see results immediately. Even though the theme of the podcast has been manage expectations, George, you know and I know it. Richardson has a rough year. Again, I don't think a lot of blame will be on him particularly, but the sense of urgency will be then, let's get him help. And you just can't afford to wait another offseason and have it go by of just, we'll just take it easy. Don't worry. We'll see if Josh Downs in year 2 can develop, and Alec Pierce in year 3, if he kind of gets his footing now. You got to be aggressive. And again, if that means trading up in the draft to get Marvin Harrison Jr., if it means a receiver springs free and maybe a T. Higgins, who is in a crowded receiver room in Cincinnati, if he's not getting the contract he wants and he's out there, you have to be aggressive in getting truly bona fide NFL talent on this roster. This is kind of, I don't say a throwaway year, but it's a trial year. Trial year where, again, the results don't matter. Let guys play, see what you got. But as soon as this season ends, 2023 ends, the results start mattering, the progress starts mattering, and you got to get legitimate answers and talent starting in 2024. And if Ballard can't do that, if he doesn't have a plan for it, he's got to be fired.
I look at this as an evaluation year. I mean, that's the way that I would call it, and it's guys proving their roles, but also trying to find out, okay, where are the big holes? Where are the needs? And you need to be very ultra aggressive about filling those holes next year, because again, it's not going to be a patient fan base. I don't blame them. I mean, this team hasn't won the division since 2014, and you're not talking about the toughest division in the NFL. Everybody else in the division has won the division since the Colts last won the division. That's never
twice, right?
Situation you want to be in. Yeah, twice. Everybody's won it twice. Now the Jacksonville pulled off the feet last year. So that's never a position you want to be in. Obviously that's hugely negative. So yeah, there's a little bit of runway that you give yourself with a rookie quarterback and a new head coach, but at the same time, and even with the managed expectations, that's for this year. This cannot be a 3 to 5 year project, and the fan base is just going to go along with it. They need to see some results quickly. And the league right now is not really a 3 to 5 year league. I mean, we see teams every year. Jacksonville went from worst to first last year. That's a very common thing anymore in the NFL. Somebody seems to do it every year. Somebody who finished last in their division last year will probably win their division this year. And it could be Carolina. I mean, it's a quick, the league, the turnaround is so fast. You go from the Rams were Super Bowl champions a couple of years ago. They're rebuilding. The Bucs were Super Bowl champions the year before the Rams. They're rebuilding. It both ways. You go up very quickly. You go down very quickly. I don't think you can, in the league and the way it is in this day and age, you can't just be patient and wait for a 3 to 5 year window. You need to take advantage immediately. So if you see promise in Richardson, if he looks like the guy that you hope he will be when he drafted him, you got to jump on that right away. It can't be a 5 year plan. It needs to be like a 2 year plan.
And two, you look around in recent history, especially, fortune does favor the bold. The teams that are aggressive are the ones, for the most part, reaping the rewards. You see the Rams, they went all in a few years ago, won a Super Bowl. I don't care what happens after that. You won a Super Bowl, mission accomplished. The Panthers, for me, again, I think they got the best quarterback in the draft in Bryce Young. And that's a team that I think absolutely in year number one, now, obviously, it's the only division worse right now than the AFC South is the NFC South, but there's still like a legitimate chance with a rookie quarterback and they trading up from 9-1 can have a chance to win the division this year right away. So it's like you see, like there are teams that have been aggressive and it's paid off and it's worked out. Chris Ballard, that's been the total antithesis of so far. His belief is patience. And so far, he's had a long enough track record too. It's not like it's like year one or year two where he's still trying to build the team in his eye. He's been here long enough where we've seen a long enough track record of what what his moves are. And especially the last 2 or 3 years, he's not been even following his own advice of building up the trenches and trying to get a team around the quarterback before getting the quarterback. The offensive line, like you mentioned before, it's hope that they bounce back, but it's still no assurances at left tackle or right guard whatsoever. Receiver, you're hoping Pittman bounces back. Pierce takes a step in year number 2. You weren't aggressive at all in trading up either last year or this year to try to get a receiver on this team. He has not been aggressive. He's been very patient and sitting back. And again, I think that has to end starting as soon as the 2023 season ends. You have to be aggressive. It's worked out. Again, the aggressiveness has, favored teams that do make these big moves and make these big trades. You see the Dolphins last year going all in on Tyreek Hill. They make the playoffs, and now I think are a team that absolutely, if Tua stays healthy, could be a legitimate Super Bowl contender. They have been aggressive. It's worked. I think now you have to, if you're Chris Ballard, have some sort of aggressive plan. And if not, I think if you're Jim Mercer, you got to move on.
The Eagles are a perfect example. The place that Shane Steichen's coming from.
Thank you.
Trade up for Smith. You made the huge blockbuster trade for A.J. Brown. Even this offseason, you move on from Miles Sanders, you go get DeAndre Swift. They're doing, they're making aggressive moves. And they're trying to build explosive players around Jalen Hurts. We keep talking about Jalen Hurts as sort of the model that you want Anthony Richardson to follow. Well, what did the Eagles do there? They went out and they got him playmakers all over the place. Dallas Goedert, all those receivers you're just talking about. They have a really deep group. I don't know where they were in Bill Barnwell's rankings, but I guarantee that was much higher than 25th.
Hot take. Yes, you're right. I could put up here in a second. I would believe they were top 5. But definitely not 25th and definitely not lower than 25th. That is for sure.
Not in the neighborhood of 25th. And that's the model that you should be following. Your coach came from there. The offense is going to be very similar. And the quarterback, that's exactly where you're trying to get. This is the blueprint that the Colts want to follow. Part of that blueprint means being ultra aggressive. And by the way, they have maybe the most physical, fully minded offensive line in the league.
Right. Yeah. These rankings, are not even taking into account offensive line and other stuff. It's basically kind of having the offensive line, the play caller, kind of all even. So even just with the Playmakers itself, Philly is 3rd. Top 5 is the 49ers 1, Bengals 2, Eagles 3, Seahawks 4, which talk about aggressiveness. Again, they got Geno Smith, and now they're putting weapons around him in order to succeed. And then number 5 is the Chargers. So you look at also, too, in those rankings, the last 2 jobs or the last 2 teams Shane Steichen's worked for, they're in the top 5. Mm-hmm. And it's like he's been at both places where they've had most of the talent that they have right now in this top 5 list. So he's used to, and he knows what it takes to win is not on the quarterback. You got to get that right, obviously. But part of the way you get the quarterback right is almost making it impossible for them to fail, which is putting legitimate talent all around them on the offensive line, but especially with this list, running back, receiver, tight end. It's not an accident. It's not a mystery. And it's also not an accident that you look at some of the Super Bowl contenders for this year coming into 2023, George. A lot of the teams we just listed in the top 5 of Playmakers are also on the short list of Super Bowl contenders as well. The formula is there. You hope that this list, if it didn't serve as a wake-up call before with Chris Ballard, absolutely does serve as a wake-up call now. But again, that should be the focus. Now that you got and drafted the quarterback, we can finally put that discussion behind us. And now it's all about what can you do to make the talent around him better. Speaking of which, George, I want to end the podcast with this. It's been a lot of negativity so far on the pod, and rightfully so. But I do want to see, because I don't know your thoughts on this. I do want to see if we can end maybe on a positive note. Let's talk about the 4 teams that drafted the big 4 quarterbacks, right? Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, the 4 guys that were thought to maybe have a chance to go in the first round. Obviously, as we know, 3 of them go in the first 4 picks, and Levis goes later on in round number 2. Do you think right now, of the 4 teams, the Colts are the best positioned to develop their young quarterback?
It's interesting because my gut reaction is no. But then I start looking at the other teams, and you look at those rankings that Bill Barnwell put out, and they're not – if they're not number 1, they're right there. They're very much in the conversation. It's so hard right now because I think all 4 teams are in different spots. Houston's in an absolute rebuild that's been
Oh,
going on for 3 years. But at the same time, you feel pretty good about D'Amico Ryans and what he's doing there. So it'll be interesting to see if that can develop the quarterback. I mean, that's the other question. If you got a good defense and a good defensive head coach, can that be a path to, the quarterback developing? It worked in Buffalo. I think they're going to try to do it in Houston. Carolina's got a really good quarterbacks head coach in Frank Reich, and he put a really good support system on that coaching staff around him. I feel like they're probably my answer because of that. I mean, if you look at the coaching staff and the guys that Frank Reich brought in to work with Bryce Young, I just feel like they were very intentional in
yes.
how they built that. And then they went and they got the best quarterback in the draft. And I think that's going to work out really well. We'll see. I've been wrong before. I just feel like that's going to be a situation that really works out well in Carolina. Tennessee is kind of heading the wrong direction,
Yeah.
and it's a weird year for them because they didn't really pick a lane. Are they contenders still? Are they rebuilding? They kind of did a little bit of both this offseason. And Will Levis stepping into that is a tough spot. And because I'm sure there's guys in that locker room that have a lot of respect for Ryan Tannehill and what they've accomplished under him, and probably are a little bit angry that Will Levis is even here. And then there's other guys in that locker room that are probably thinking this is, a year or two overdue and would like to see Levis start right away. That's never a good thing for a rookie quarterback to be caught in the middle of, I don't think. You want to
No.
have everybody behind you. So I wouldn't put Tennessee high up on the list. I wouldn't put Houston high up on the list just because they're just so far away. To me, it's between Carolina and the Colts. And I would give Carolina the edge just because of how intentional they were in bringing offensive minds and specifically quarterback minds on that coaching staff to help develop Bryce Young.
So I would actually answer the Colts. I know it's funny. Last 40 minutes we've been recording. It's been a lot of negativity again, rightfully so. But in case anyone's not seen the list, to fill the audience in. So the Colts were 25th on Bill Barnwell's list of playmakers. The Texans were 32nd. The Panthers were 31st. And the Titans were 29th. So even though the Colts are 25th, which is, again, bottom quartile, the other three teams that took one of the big four quarterbacks are in a worse position. And if you look at it, too, they are in a situation where I think even though Bryce Young is light years ahead of Anthony Richardson in terms of being pro ready, I think over the long haul, you have the situation around Richardson, I think, is better right now for him to develop than is Bryce Young. Because you kind of look around. Like, let's start with Carolina, right? I would say, I don't know how you feel about this, if you want to go position by position really fast here. I would say Jonathan Taylor is better than Miles Sanders. I would take Michael Pittman Jr. and his youth right now over Adam Thielen, who's had a way more productive career, but is also on the back end of that career. Mm-hmm. And you look at Carolina's draft capital in order to be aggressive, which, again, I think is still the right move. Don't get me wrong. I think it's the right move in going up from 9 to 1. But in going from 9 to 1, they not only gave up a first and second round pick in this year's draft, they also gave up a first and second round pick in next year's draft. So the Colts draft capital, by staying pat at number 4, you can now put yourself in a situation where you are able to get Marvin Harrison Jr. or maybe the second best receiver coming out of the draft in next year's draft. So if that's a situation where you can infuse, I should say, talent around Richardson that the Carolina Panthers just right now aren't able to do because they gave up so much draft capital and also traded away their best receiver, DJ Moore, in order to go get Bryce Young. The Texans, like you mentioned before, are a total mess and have no talent on offense whatsoever. They are dead last in Bill Barnwell's rankings, and there's no proven receiver. Robert Woods is the most veteran guy, but again, he, since his ACL injury, has been nowhere close to being a productive receiver. And that's like, you kind of look, there's nothing really exciting outside of really Dameon Pierce that gets you excited if you're a Texans fan that you think CJ Stroud can kind of come in right away and have success. And the Titans, like you mentioned, I mean, they're just, I don't know what the hell they're doing. They're spinning their wheels. Derrick Henry is clearly on the decline. You trade away A.J. Brown. You get Treylon Burks, which I think still massive question mark. And kind of like a lot of the Colts receivers, still some potential, but nothing proven on the field right now whatsoever. And you don't really know the direction they're going in. So you look around like quickly, even though it's pretty dire in Indy, I still think the Colts have the best chance of developing or best position, maybe I should say, best position to develop their young quarterback over and versus the other three teams that drafted a quarterback in either the first round or again early early in the second round as well. So again, it only also, I think, underscores the importance for Chris Ballard to really make next offseason count as much as he can. But so far, starting point going into at least 2023, I do think the Colts are best positioned talent-wise of the four teams to at least give Richardson the most chance of success compared to right now the other three rookie quarterbacks that will either see the field or, in Levis's case, maybe have a chance to see the field.
I think the other element there is a scheme. I think the fact that he's coming in with a head coach who's succeeded with a quarterback who's similar to him, that's the other element that I would give in the Colts' favor. So, like I said, for me, it's between the Colts and the Panthers. I would give the Panthers just a slight tip because I think they were more aggressive in their coaching hires. But ultimately, I think Richardson's in a good spot. When you look at what else is going on, I'd much rather be the quarterback in Indianapolis right now than Houston or Tennessee. And, again, Panthers on that list have the 31st best skilled guys around them. That's not anything to get excited about. Yeah, I think all four of them, there's work to be done, but that's what happens. When you're high enough to get a quarterback like this, there's work to be done. I mean, that's part of the equation here.
And a team that, I guess, to wrap up, especially speaking of the division, because the other two teams in the division drafted a quarterback pretty high, and obviously now the Colts are at least second in terms of the division, in terms of best playmakers, which, again, does not say much when the gap between them and the Jaguars is as big as right now the Atlantic Ocean. But still, like, you look at Jacksonville, again, as now a model for success. They showed you even quickly you can turn around if you get the right guy in there, the coach, which so far I like what I've seen from Shane Steichen. Obviously, we'll see what he is as a head coach, but his past experience with the Eagles and the Chargers has you believe in this could work out really well. And now you see Jacksonville, being aggressive, not this past offseason, the offseason before, in getting some weapons into Jacksonville to surround Trevor Lawrence. It worked pretty damn well, George. It worked pretty damn well. So the blueprint is out there. And if you're the Colts, if you can replicate, this is kind of funny how the tables have turned, replicate what the Jaguars have done in recent memory, you can really turn this ship around pretty quickly. And again, it goes back to aggressiveness, but this is why I think this list also emphasizes 2024. We talked about this draft, George, being the biggest in this offseason, really, with Shane Steichen hire and Anthony Richardson draft selection as two of the biggest moves that will help determine the next 5 years of the Colts' future. I think if you want to add a third element to that of what will help decide if the Colts are on the path to Super Bowl contention in the next 5 years or just spinning their wheels and stuck in mediocrity, it's also going to be the 2024 offseason of what do you do to put talent around Richardson? I think that's now, I think, a third element we can kind of add in here, look at. We'll see when we look back in 2023. So when we look back in, let's say, 2028, I think those are the three things: the head coach hire in 2023, the draft selection in 2023, and the offseason of 2024, the pivotal offseason of 2024. Those things will be the three things that shape this Colts team in 2028 and beyond. Look at that, George. We are already basically rounding out the 2023 offseason with this podcast, and here we are already talking about the 2024 offseason right away. Never stops.
They move fast in the NFL, man.
That they do. That they do. Speaking of moving fast, the offseason basically, George, is over. That's it. You're going on vacation next week to beautiful Florida. I'm going to the beach the following week. So this is, again, right now, barring any emergency, and with our luck in making predictions, even though we are predicting this will be the last podcast before our big training camp podcast, I guess 3 weeks from now, there's going to be some sort of big breaking news, some sort of extension, some sort of injury, maybe some sort of Shaq Leonard update, good or bad, that maybe will have us back here on the pod. But tentatively right now scheduled, this is our last pod of really off season. We will be back in about 3 weeks or so to get you set with a big time training camp preview to kind of talk about a lot of the storylines we'll be watching and the areas of focus, position groups, battles, stuff like that, that really I think will be dominating the training camp headlines here. So that'll be our next podcast, barring some unexpected big time news. So if you haven't already, I don't know what you're waiting for, but that's a perfect summer treat, George. Download our podcast, wherever you get your podcast, the bright blue logo here, Blue Horseshoe Pod, and subscribe to YouTube, Blue Horseshoe Pod, so you can look at our beautiful, especially in a few weeks, tan faces each and every episode. And George, I think we can also mention our plan for training camp, since it's basically already here. Our goal for training camp is going to be this: a pod a day. Every day, George will be boots on the ground at training camp. We've been recording mostly this offseason hour-long pods, roughly 45 minutes to an hour. So we're going to try to be more quick, 15, 20 minutes, daily updates on how, obviously, Anthony Richardson is looking, how the team is looking, how the offensive line battles are going, Shaq Leonard's health. There's a lot of storylines, George, so we figure might as well just go quick hitters every day, bing, bang, boom, and give you the sights and sounds of updates of what we're looking for, and also how players are developing, how this team is starting to look. So we will be turning into, very shortly here, a daily training camp pod, which also, so you don't fall behind, is more important than ever. Subscribe and download wherever you get your pods and on YouTube so you can stay up to date with everything Colts. We will be truly pounding out content late into July and all August long.
Yep. Every day from Westfield, we will have it all covered. Every snap of training camp.
And the good news is it looks like the Jets are going to be on Hard Knocks, which means your setup won't be totally taken over by Hard Knocks like it was last year when the Lions came to town and they just stole the picnic bench they did a lot of pods on. Your territory should be marked and should be safe.
Yep. Should be clear sailing from here on. We'll see how it goes. Chicago media, you never know. Maybe they'll come in and take over, but that's it. That's all there is. So no, I'm excited. I think as we talked about at the top, there's new energy. There's a lot of unknown going into this year. I think it should be a really fun training camp. See how things play out.
A lot of excitement, especially too with 2 joint practices. So that's going to be also huge too, and kind of seeing little juices flowing and kind of get an early preview how this team is looking, how things are developing as well. So that's also a good measuring stick as well, which is all the more reason why we're doing it daily, and all the more reason why you should subscribe and download to make sure you don't miss any action of the Blue Horseshoe Pod. So George, enjoy vacation, rest up. It's going to be it's going to be a dead sprint once you do get back here. So again, barring any unforeseen breaking news, we'll be talking to you in 3 weeks with a massive training camp preview of the Blue Horseshoe Pod. But until then, we'll say enjoy your little summer break. Enjoy the sun, enjoy the sights, enjoy the sounds of summer. And we'll talk to you in a few weeks right here on the Blue Horseshoe Pod.